to our study session on May 13th, 2024 in the council chambers. And the first item is the AFS presentation. So Bruce Lowry, if you would like to come forward, and you've been a longtime fan and friend of AFS and Independence, and just share with us some of your knowledge on the process.
Am I close enough to the microphone?
Can we hear him? Okay. Thank you, Bruce.
My name is Bruce Lowry. I've been a resident of Independence since 1967, and been involved with AFS since 1984. And I'm here tonight to, and that's also after 39 years as city clerk of this city, which I destroyed things, I think, when I was here. We're here tonight to share the AFS experience and a little story as it relates to Independence. The AFS program began in 1947 when the volunteer ambulance drivers from World War I and World War II organized a student exchange program of hosting in the USA some children from French and German families who had sheltered American soldiers during the war. The AFS program then started in Independence in 1959 when Phil and Lenore Weeks hosted a girl from Osorno, Chile, and Independence has hosted over 436 students since then. Thanks to the former Councilmember Page, Dan McGraw, Kathy Vest, and Matt Mallinson, all graduates of Van Horn, we have determined that Van Horn started in the AFS program in 1962, but we still need additional information. So we'd be pleased to hear from anyone who knows about the early AFS activities in Van Horn. Likewise, additional information is needed about the AFS history at Fort Osage prior to 1989, although recently we received significant helpful information from Dick and Ann Franklin. I was lucky to get information from the early activities of AFS in about 1988, and have compiled the information for the Truman and Chrisman schools. So tonight in Independence, AFS organization would like to introduce the student who's been at Truman this year. We have a student at William Chrisman, but she notified me this morning that she's sick, so we only were able to get one student here, except we have some other students who've been involved in years previously, and having been hosted by the family who is hosting Sebnon this year. As we approach the end of the year, we sincerely hope that they will be returning to visit us in Independence over the years, and we anticipate that a number of members of the hosting families will be visiting them in their homes and as they start their own families themselves. For most of the people involved there's an ongoing relationship that has been established. I know that's true for my wife and me, and the students this year, Sebnam Shaheen will come forward and introduce herself and tell a little bit about her.
Shebnan Shaheen, welcome to the City of Independence. We're glad that you're here. You're from the country of Turkey, and so please tell us a little about yourself.
Thank you. My name is Shebnam. I'm from Turkey. I live in a city called Isparta. It's about 8 hours drive away from Istanbul. My mom, Rana, is a pharmacist. I'm an only child. Here I'm living with the Gunn family. I want to say a thank you to them. They've been amazing and really welcoming. In the United States, I enjoy trying new things like watching football, baseball, and hockey games. Back home, I used to only watch volleyball. And I also want to say thank you to the City Council for the donation of the New Year's Eve hockey game tickets. It was really fun. Now in my school here at Truman, I'm in concert choir. It's been an amazing and a new experience for me to be able to participate in concerts and contests. I even managed to get gold at district and state with my choir group. After this, I plan to study music and theater in college and create more art. And again, I want to thank the City Council for supporting the AFS program, which is a program gives students like me a great opportunity to learn more about America and the families here to learn about other cultures. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And also, we've got a certificate, of appreciation for you participating in the program. So if we could do that.
One, two, three. 1, 2, 3. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Thanks for participating in the program.
We're fortunate tonight also to have the president of the Kansas City chapter, at which we have 24 students this year.
Hi, I'm Kathy Hallberg. I am a graduate of Truman, class of 80. That sounds like a really long time ago now when I say it. I've been a host sister 9 times. You can't hear me. I've been a host sister 9 times and a host mom 3 times. So from all over. AFS is one of those things, it's truly, like Bruce says, it kind of, if anyone's done it, it's a bit of an addiction. You have to do it again, and then you have to do it again. And the kids come back. So we've got Fabi's visiting from last year, already back. She hasn't even been gone a year. One of the things I think that AFS, it's probably more important than ever, the goal is to basically create global citizens, give kids the skills and the experiences that they need in this ever-changing, bigger world that we seem to be living in. And so as we influence the kids, yes, we learn about their cultures, they learn about ours, but it's the investment that you make in their skills and their growth as they become adults and begin to make, influential decisions in the world. So those are the things that we always try to remember is you may be planting a little seed that may grow and grow and grow, and then it turns into something really cool several years from now. So I've got some magazines because AFS is 75 years old. Actually, it's 76 years old now. But this just shows some of the history through the years. So I'll just leave them and you guys can take a look at them.
Thank you very much.
Are there any questions?
We're just grateful that you've worked on it, and the Guns have been so kind to open up their home, and so I just think that's terrific.
I probably didn't do what I should have done. I should have brought a sign-up sheet to get your signature for next year. But thank you for being receptive to the AFS program and being so generous with the New Year's Eve hockey games for the Mavericks. The students who attend all rave about it. Some of them have never seen hockey before. Some of them are experienced, but it's a great experience. And of course, the Mavericks are doing especially well this year. So
That's right. They're
Well,
in the
thank
now
you.
third round of the playoffs, which
Yeah.
they've never been that far before. So this is pretty extraordinary. So thank you, Bruce, and thank you for your help in that regard and your commitment to AFS. Okay, next up is Doug Cowan. You're going to talk about the iShare program. So, Mr. Cowan, CEO of CSL, please proceed. And you've got 30 seconds.
Okay, here we go.
You know I'm teasing.
We'll try to untangle one of the most complicated things in social services in the next 22 seconds. Mayor, members of the council, thank you for having me tonight. Some weeks ago, I got an inquiry through the city manager's office about the iShare program, and I said I think that this may be more comprehensively delivered in looking at the state of rent and utility assistance. And when we talk about that, we're talking about helping to keep our neighbors the families who live next door to us, across the street from us, the people we go to school with, the people we go to church with, the people we work with, the people in this community safe and stably housed, and how do we create a more stable community. And a lot has changed since COVID and looking at the rental market, utility market. So here we go. I'm going to move through this quickly. Let me just share a few quick facts about utility assistance. Hopefully most of you are aware that the United Way of Greater Kansas City operates our regional social services call center. It's easily accessed by dialing 211 from any phone. I had the good fortune to represent funded agencies by United Way of Greater Kansas City as one of the 2 board members who represent our industry. Had a lot of chance to be involved with data behind the 211 call center. Overwhelmingly, if you looked at the top 10, really you could look at the top 3 requests for assistance, and it was utility assistance and then everything else. And it is the most sought after, whether you're in Independence or Kansas City or across the country. Some things in the background about utility assistance is that many people don't know is that oftentimes renters can be evicted if their utilities are shut off. It means that their utilities are tied to the satisfactions of the lease. That it most commonly manifests itself in publicly supported housing. And some of that is because if there is a utility shut off, you can imagine what might start to happen to freezers and refrigerators. Things can start to defrost and they can go all over the house, and bad things can happen. I could go on and tell you stories and stories, but it oftentimes, and I don't want to ever overstate anything, but sometimes it does create a life or death situation. We have families calling us in a panic that they have refrigerated medicine and they're looking at a utility shut off, and that creates a very dire situation for a family in need. A few other things about utility assistance. According to data from the Pew Research Center, about 7 out of 10 payday loan users use money for recurring expenses like utilities and other bills. So we know that when there is that need, people turn to what we would categorize as lenders of last resort. People often know that these are toxic debt traps, but they're desperate to keep their families safe and stably housed and keep their utilities on. The paradox of all of this conversation is that low to moderate income families often live in the oldest and the least energy efficient housing in our community. And Independence is really a classic test case for that. We look at, especially west of Nolan Road, our housing stock is incredibly aged. And we look at, again, I could go on for stories and stories, but unfortunately there are rental homes, and I'm sure some owner-occupied homes that have big holes in the roof. There are doors missing. There are windows missing. There is oftentimes significant amounts of substandard housing. And with that, even if it's in good shape, it's often leaky and drafty, and tenants oftentimes find themselves paying exorbitant utility rates as a result of that. So how do families get help? What's the best option when families are struggling? The biggest pot of money that's available out there is what's called the LIHEAP program. It's federal dollars that trickle down to the state, then are awarded into and are administered across the state of Missouri by a series of organizations that have the designation of community action agencies. So here in Kansas City, it's the Greater Kansas City Community Action Agency that helps on behalf of the state to process these applications. In 2024, according to the state social services website, Missouri got just a little bit less than $80 million in LIHEAP funds. And families may get $1,400 a year over 2 cycles. Unfortunately, this is a classic example of where, as we often say in our industry, you have to prove how poor you are, and you have to sustain yourself in a high level of poverty. For example, to qualify for the LIHEAP program, you cannot demonstrate that you have more than $3,000 in assets available to you. And that can include a wide array of things. So these are not very flexible funds. And unfortunately, this is an example of where the system, unfortunately, sometimes trains people to remain impoverished because they rely on this support, and the support does not allow any flexibility within that. Beyond that, in terms of government, there are a smattering of programs that are far, far less than LIHEAP. There are some state programs, occasionally some county funds, and we'll get to city funds here in a minute. So most of you know the iShare program was founded a long time ago, in 1978. Here's the resolutions if you ever want to look it up. But the iShare budget from Independence Power and Light was $60,000 for the last fiscal year. Historically, how that has worked, CSL has been the administrating partner of that. It's worthy to note that Community Services League has operated that program with no overhead, so we take all $60,000 and it goes directly into, all of it goes to delinquent utility bills. CSL garners $60,000 in additional supports from other funders, whether it's philanthropy or grants, other utility assistance contracts. And so in total, the total output and support of the iShare program is $120,000 a year in help. So how do we distribute the iShare money? We use discretion, but we follow the general guiding principles. And I would tell you that we've worked collectively with the city manager's office, Independence Utilities, and the council to work on some a set of guiding policies and principles that allow a little more flexibility. We want to get the balance to $0 and help families get a fresh start. If they have an $800 bill, even though it's a lot of money to pay, when I first started at CSL 15 years ago, we would give everybody the same $200, no matter what your bill was, and you may still walk out with a significant balance. And we have really determined that the best thing that we can do is give citizens a fresh start, a chance to clear out their bill, because they're oftentimes accruing additional fees and penalties as that balance hangs over their head. We often look at, or not often, we ask what they can pay. What can they pay that day? What can they use their creativity and get over to Independence Utilities and pay? We are layering it with other supports. So again, we're trying to get a family out of a crisis situation. As I said earlier, a family may have additional encumbrances upon them, and we're trying to help them get a fresh start. We're often working in coordination with the school. We're oftentimes working in coordination with mental health caseworkers, physical help. We're helping families to connect to other resources, whether it's financial coaching, workforce development, housing supports, other things that happen at Community Services League. We don't prioritize any type of referrals, but we do value referrals from other partners, because if you see the line above it where we layer it with supports, if somebody's working with, for example, let's say Habitat for Humanity or another great organization, it means they're getting some additional supports, and the likelihood they can continue to remain stably housed is high. So in addition, a few years after the iShare program, the IRAP program, the Independence Rate Assistance Program, was founded in 1985. The IRAP budget for 2023-24 is $230,000. That approval is reflected as a credit on that person's utility bill. Help is available for those 62 years and older and or having a disability status. And typically the way that manifests is a person can get up to a 50% credit on their bill, but they must maintain their usage at historical levels. So while it would never be fair to paint with a broad brushstroke, we're often talking about one household or one person household seniors that are typically on this program, very fixed income. And this program, I have seen it really, it's always been a nice program. In where we're at here in 2024, this program is a lifeline for our aging population. And that is largely due to the drastic increases in rent and how Social Security has not kept up with that rate of inflation. So oftentimes our seniors are paying significantly more in rent, and they're trying to cobble together rent, utility, and a little bit of money for life. And so having the IRAP program is a major lifeline to keep them stably housed and aging in place in our community. I want to just highlight very quickly a couple of historical things. During 2020, the Community Services League, on behalf of the city, implemented a little bit more than $2.2 million that came to the city's allocation of CARES Act dollars. Just short of 4,000 payments were made at an average of $500 to keep utilities on here in Independence, and remain grateful for the council and city staff recommending that this be a priority issue. You can't talk about utility assistance without rent assistance. So there is no federal rent program like the LIHEAP program I talked about earlier with utility assistance. There's a very modest amount of money through the Missouri Housing Development Commission, which is essentially the state of Missouri's housing department. So we are just coming off of significant COVID relief dollars for rental assistance. The first goes all the way back to the end of there was an initial $21 billion approved nationally from the Trump administration, and then the Biden administration approved an additional $25 billion. So there was $46 billion nationally that came through for rental assistance. So in the Jackson County chose Community Services League and a slew of coordinating partners to administer about $40 million of funds that helped with both rent and utilities in suburban Jackson County. And what I mean by that is the portions of Jackson County outside the city limits of Kansas City, because Kansas City had its own tranche of money based on its population. So for those 3 years, we were able to provide assistance to just over 7,000 households in suburban Jackson County who needed support of about $5,200 on average. And I don't have the data in front of me, but it was relayed to me from staff that about 65% of that average assistance was rental assistance, and about 35% of that was utility assistance. We are continuing to see an eviction crisis in Jackson County. I would encourage you to visit the Eviction Lab, which is really the industry leader in looking at eviction data. So as of April 1st of this year, these are numbers as of April 1st. Since March 15th, the date of the onset of the pandemic, there have been more than 27,000 evictions filed in Jackson County. There have been 8,600 evictions in the last 365 days. And some of that is there's a lot of causes for eviction, and this is not an eviction study session, but I would just suggest to you that part of that is the continuing skyrocketing of rental rates. And so you can see here the bottom line, HUD 2024 FMR stands for the Department of Housing and Urban Development. FMR stands for fair market rent. They set a fair market rent standard for every metropolitan area in the United States. So in Kansas City, we have $985 is deemed a fair market rent for an efficiency studio, $1,098 for one bedroom, $1,258 for two, $1,645 for three, and $1,931 for a 4-bedroom. And I was just casually scrolling through Google this afternoon, and I was interested in Zillow this afternoon for some rental rates. In the extreme southeast portion of our city, we have, I believe it's the Brittany Ridge neighborhood. There are one home for rent at $2,600, one home for $2,700 a month. Just if you're interested what things are going for, if you haven't looked for a rental home. And I think I found one in the exhaustive list that was less than $700 a month. So it tells you where we're at. So right now, what are we doing? CSL this year continues to administer. We received about $1 million from the Missouri Housing Development Commission that we are currently administering. These are essentially for all intents and purposes, about $1 million in remaining COVID relief dollars that the state is dispersing. A person is only eligible to access this support if they are actively in eviction in the 16th Circuit Court. As some of you might remember, the council approved a couple of contracts at $824,000, one to Community Services League and one to Metro Lutheran Ministries. Those contracts start on July 1 and go for 2 years, so we're very excited to begin that work on behalf of the city and in partnership with Metro Lutheran Ministries. Those are from home ARP funds, ARP of course referring to the American Rescue Plan work. So I did want to share with you what does one day at CSL look like, and we did nothing more scientific than tally marks, but oftentimes that tells a good story. So this was a week ago, Monday, May 6th, at our Nolan Road office, just across the street from you. We had 17 walk-in requests for utility help and 10 for rent, and I would suggest to you that's a fairly average day. So 27 walk-in requests. I'm sure I could pull our phone records and it would be significantly higher too, looking at those. So what could be done? The current system of assistance, the current system of assistance is broken and disparate. It is disjointed. There is not necessarily a lot of centralized support. Families exhaust themselves trying to connect to support, and it is something we run into head on every day. We desperately need more energy efficient housing units. If families could reduce their utility outlay every month, it would be a phenomenal opportunity for them to remain stably housed. Smart meters would help residents see their current usage. So a lot of times, I'm the same way. Just today at 807 South Main, where I live, I opened my utility bill. Had no idea what it was going to be. It's kind of a fun game to play every month. And sorry, I'm just trying to add a little levity, but this is a reality. People don't know what they are going to pay until the bill comes. And so smart meters that could help families evaluate their usage on an hour-by-hour, a day-by-day basis would be critical to help them. My last slides. Some opportunities to consider. Separate consideration for those living in units where utility shutoff equals eviction, and I know that's a heavy lift and a heavy thing to ask for, but we often have people in this community that could be out on the street if they don't pay their utility bill. Pop-up LIHEAP events, we've seen a lot of those. Evergy has been very proactive in having LIHEAP events. We've hosted several at our Community Services League offices in Blue Springs and Oak Grove. Oftentimes, and I'm not an expert in this, but in talking with enough folks over the years, it has always been a critique of Independence Utilities rebate program that you must be affluent enough to buy the high-end air conditioner. You must be affluent enough to buy the high-end product to then get a rebate. Anything that we can do to help families upgrade, even if they don't reach the proper SEER rating or the different thresholds that you have to, anything that we can encourage landlords in tenant-occupied units can be done and significantly help low-income families. And we continue to see repayment plans for old debt as a critical need. There are many families waiting to be housed, and the one thing that is stopping them from becoming stably housed is a looming debt to Evergy, Spire, Independence Utilities, could be anybody, but they can't turn on new electrical service. And the catch-22 is they can't sign a lease because they can't have utilities and the vicious cycle. So how am I going to come up with hundreds, if not thousands of dollars? So I think those are some things to consider. I'm not suggesting those are light things to consider, but we are in a very challenging time for families. So I do appreciate your time, and to let me share this information, I'd be happy to yield any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Cowan? Go ahead.
Mr. Cowan, as always, thank you for your excellent presentation. I am interested in that the dollars for rental assistance are only available if you are in an eviction court situation. And we know that probably half of evictions are informal. Either somebody changes the locks or makes threats to the tenant. If they don't come up, they have to go, and so they leave in the night. Are there any resources for groups of folks who are on the edge and not fully in eviction court?
There's a spattering of programs. We do have several pots of money that if you cobble them together are several $100,000. One of the challenges, I talked about earlier the summary from the Federal Emergency Rental Assistance Program. The average assist going out the door was $5,200. By the time a tenant is a month late, they get a month of grace from their landlord, and then extend that to another one. Then you've got 3 months there, and let's say an average home in Independence is renting for $1,200 to $1,500 a month. There's $4,500 in rent at that $1,500 level. Add on your utilities. What we're seeing, that's pretty average. We're seeing families $5,000 behind. And I won't live in the past, but 15 years ago when I started, we routinely we had caps on rental assistance at $300 a month, and we didn't often hit that cap. Sometimes $150 to $275 was plenty. We had a $200 cap on utilities 15 years ago, and we often didn't hit that. We are now dealing with just such an enormous amount of money, and largely the resources from state and other providers have stayed flat. It has certainly not kept up with where we're at, and so it's a more limited amount of individual families that we're able to help simply due to the significant dollar amount.
And certainly, the data is out there that Kansas City saw the highest rate increase in rental costs for the entire United States. And it's always a difficult conversation with people who own their homes. And, I know that my mortgage payment is less than my daughter's apartment rent. And I'm in a very lucky spot for that. But there is a big disconnect from people who are renting on the market and people who own their homes and are thinking in much older dollars. So thank you very much for the update.
Sure.
Thank you. Anyone else? Again, Mr. Cowan, great job. Thank you for your work at CSL. Your CSL is a great organization for our city, and without you, I don't know where we'd be. So I
Thank you for your
appreciate your
time.
work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. City Manager, it brings us to the 24-25 budget presentation.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the council. My name is Zach Walker, the City Manager for the City of Independence. And it is my pleasure this evening to present to you the proposed budget for fiscal year beginning July 1, 2024, in accordance with Section 8.2 of the City Charter. Now, before continuing tonight, I'd be remiss if I didn't thank many people who helped make this year's budget proposal possible. I'd certainly like to thank the mayor and council for delivering me and the leadership team with a focused action plan that lays out your priorities for the year. I'd like to thank the many citizens throughout the course of the year who have provided us feedback on their priorities, particularly through the Citizen Satisfaction Survey. And I'd like to thank my leadership team and our city staff who've spent countless hours preparing thoughtful proposals and working hard to bring this budget into balance in accordance with the state constitution. Specifically, I'd like to thank our budget team, our interim director of finance, Megan Borth, our budget manager, Melissa Sill. This group has worked very hard and sacrificed many countless nights and weekends working to bring this budget picture into focus, and certainly their ingenuity and innovation has helped us navigate a resource-restricted environment to bring forth a budget that I think continues to build on the community we all expect. So the proposed budget for this year totals $413 million, $413,080,019 to be exact, an increase of 4.6% over last year's adopted budget. The growth this year is driven primarily by capital improvements, particularly the increase in our capital improvement sales tax for fire, which is allowing us to begin to address a lot of the deferred maintenance needs of our fire stations. There are also, of course, increases in operating expenses. Those have increased by a total of 5% due to factors such as inflation, accounting for technology services expenditures like cybersecurity measures. Those kind of investments have been long deferred, and we're making headway in implementing those, but as we go through these are very expensive investments to make, but certainly less expensive than trying to unlock an organization that's fallen victim to a ransomware attack. Before I go much further with the detail of next year's budget, just want to highlight quickly for you some of the things we were able to do in this past year thanks to the budget that was approved by the council. For example, being able to complete over 1,000 permitted establishment inspections through our health department, implement the digital timekeeping system, complete 51 lane miles of preventative maintenance to our roadways, and purchase body cameras and other technology enhancements for the police department, as well as completion of the fire department strategic plan. So as a result of our collective steadfast and disciplined leadership, both by the council and city staff, we find ourselves in an improved position from years past. For example, the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2024 will see the general fund add $1.4 million to the reserve balance, bringing that up to 14.3%, and further closing in on the council's minimum reserve balance at 16%. Pardon me. There we go. But we stand at a crossroads of a monumental moment in our city's history as the council and community contemplate generational issues such as amendments to our city charter, a general obligation bond issue to begin addressing our $1 billion of deferred maintenance, and the future ownership and governance of Power and Light. Each of those issues fall flat, however, if we don't continue to provide the financial stability that allows us to provide the superior basic services our citizens deserve. The submitted budget for this fiscal year builds on the corrective actions taken in previous years and continues to stabilize services and operations following years of budgetary delay and deferral. Now, as I mentioned, our community rightfully expects that superior delivery of basic services. Meeting those expectations without growth in revenue requires a realignment of dollars away from legacy programs and redundant services. And recognizing this reality, this year we began working with staff this past September to address this challenge. The team and I focused on an innovative approach to optimize our resources and control long-term costs, provide services that are reliable and sustainable, and identify solutions through collaboration and open communication. As I have said many times before, simply cutting other programs is not the answer. Even simply eliminating low-priority programs may not be the answer. Instead, we must look to reallocate resources to improve efficiency and fiscal sustainability. And for the past 7 years, we have worked together to prioritize services, managing expenditures, drive efficiency, and execute objectives that address the ongoing structural imbalance that has negatively impacted the city's financial position. This required the collaboration and support of the city council, city leaders, bargaining units, and other key stakeholders. This year, the city began utilizing priority-based budgeting to address the structural issues through the reallocation of existing resources in the absence of new revenue streams. Through this process, departments identified the programs and services they are providing to the citizens of Independence. They developed a cost for each program and then rated it against the action plan identified by the city council. And as I mentioned, the action plan was adopted in early 2023, and it sets 6 strategic purposes for our organization. This document, a living document, has provided much needed focus for our organization as we seek to align council expectations with available resources. So now let's dive into the budget picture. As I developed this year's budget, I was met with the following objectives: to address a structural imbalance in the general fund of approximately $4.3 million. This reflects the shortfall between forecasted revenues for fiscal year 24-25 and projected expenditures for the same period, just to sustain current service delivery levels. Given our meager staffing levels and operating budgets for these basic services, it was imperative that we address this structural imbalance in a manner that did not further reduce current operations. We needed to allocate funding to provide a 2% across-the-board wage increase for all non-represented employees in the general fund and adequately budget for all of our contractually obligated wage increases for our represented employees. Of particular importance was identifying funding capacity to negotiate fair and sustainable wages with the Fraternal Order of Police Lodge 1 and the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers Local 53 Maintenance and Clerical, both of which have collective bargaining agreements that expire in 2024. It was important this year that we begin to accurately budget for the fire department's cost of operations. Last year's budget allocated $826,800 toward overtime. Instead, the department toward this expenditure, of which $400,000, was budgeted for overtime. Instead, the department's projected to spend more than double that amount and other pays by $2 million for fiscal year 23-24. In recent years, additional personnel have been added with the intention of minimizing overtime expenses, but ongoing challenges with hiring has not helped that situation as much as had been hoped. As such, I am recommending that this budget accurately reflect the true cost of providing this service by allocating $2.4 million for these expenses and showing the true cost of what it costs to run our fire service at the level we expect. We want to account for the loss of federal funds subsidizing public transportation. Fiscal year 23-24 represented the final year of American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA funds, supporting the operating budget for public transit. That amount totaled approximately $1.3 million. This year, the general fund budget contains a proposed allocation of $1.3 million. Given the loss of federal funds and the inability to increase general fund appropriations for this service, city staff are working closely with the Kansas City Area Transportation Authority to evaluate options for revising fixed route services to match available resources. The total revenues for the general fund in fiscal year 24-25 are $83,318,302, which is a year-over-year increase of $5.2 million. Budgeted revenues increased $5.7 million from 22-23 actuals. The increase for 23-24 is primarily due to growth in property tax, use tax receipts, and retail sales tax receipts. The total expenditures for the general fund match revenues at $83,318,302 and does include a contingency amount of $603,626. That represents an increase of 1.6% from 23-24 forecasted expenditures and is a 6.7% increase compared to the adopted budget. That increase is primarily driven by the increased cost in overtime and other pays. Again, for this year, we wanted to show how each dollar is allocated across the fund. For the general fund, every dollar that is brought in, 45 cents of that dollar is allocated to the police department, 30 cents to the fire department, and then 8 cents to community development, 7 cents to municipal services, 2 cents each to debt service, municipal court, and the city manager's office, as well as parks, recreation, and tourism, and 1 cent each for finance, the mayor and council office, and the non-departmental budget. The budget, as I mentioned, continues to focus on financial sustainability by meeting the council's objective of improving long-range financial planning and decision-making. And a key component of that strategy has been updating and developing the city's financial policies, including achieving the unrestricted fund balance target of 16% for the general fund. As I mentioned, we are planning to land this current fiscal year at a balance of 14.3% and add an additional $600,000 to fund balance for next year's budget. Now, I know this picture continues to look bleak. But last year, we were projected to be negative by $15 million by fiscal year 27-28. Now, a year later, we're projected to be negative by $10 million by fiscal year 27-28. And while that'd be easy to laugh off, we still have made improvement. We're presenting a conservative budget again this year, anticipating revenue growth, but also anticipating expenditures that are outpacing revenue growth. Inflation continues to drive up the cost of materials and supplies just to provide our services. Those investments in protecting the public assets through cybersecurity investments continue to prove expensive. And then the costs that make us competitive with our peers out there, like market adjustments to salary and health insurance benefits, also continue to rise, meaning increased expenditures. So to balance this year's budget, well over a dozen strategies were contemplated. And after careful consideration and evaluation, I'm recommending the following changes of note to the general fund. a reduction in force of 1 filled position and 2 vacant positions in the Finance Department, and 3 filled positions in the City Communications Division of the City Manager's Office. Several additional positions in both departments will be backfilled, but at a lower annual expense. Cumulatively, this represents a savings of $330,000 in the general fund and $512,000 across all other funds. These changes have already been implemented. Recommended a reduction in force of 2 filled, non-represented positions in the fire department, resulting in a savings of $138,585. Those changes have also been implemented. We are proposing an increase to revenue totaling $341,000 through adjustments to the city's fee schedule, including updates to business license fees, building permit fees, and various health and animal service department fees. The submitted budget also recommends the elimination of the waiver for inspecting cafeterias at all schools in the Independent School District, valued at $25,000. We're proposing to redirect cost allocations from the general fund in the amount of $3,245,000, $245,791. A lot of numbers here and not much water, so bear with me. This includes continuing to manage the fire department personnel costs through the support of the newly expanded fire sales tax in the amount of $2,746,271. That also includes allocating $499,520 in general fund expenses in the municipal service department to the various sales tax and enterprise funds consistent with the allocation of an employee's time and nature of their work. Both measures represent a short-term savings and not a structural change in nature. We are recommending the elimination of the Open Access Plan 1 for all active employees from the city's self-funded health insurance plan effective January 1. This recommendation will only yield 6 months of savings for fiscal year 25 because the calendar year is what is used for our health insurance plan. Therefore, the submitted budget anticipates a savings of $685,000 in the general fund this year and another $600,000 citywide. In future years, it is expected that this recommendation will save $1.37 million in the general fund and $1.2 million citywide. It should be noted, as you just heard, that the city will continue to offer 3 different health insurance options, but should also be noted that as public servants, we serve a community where 16% of our residents under the age of 65 do not have any kind of health insurance coverage. We recommend streamlining or eliminating redundant software platforms, saving $110,000, of which $20,200 is from the general fund. Finally, we recommend a hiring chill on vacant positions in the general fund totaling $3,325,344. Now, that does not mean a hard hiring freeze. That means I will have to work with members of my leadership team to balance hiring against available resources in the budget. But that figure represents the current vacancy savings in the general fund at the time the budget was finalized for submittal to the council. The net savings from these recommendations is $603,626, including my recommendation to fund just $64,000 of the $1.3 million in new spending requests from department directors. These were the requests that we approved for new spending. $25,400 for salary increases for 4 municipal court clerks. $25,000 for the general fund portion of the city's obligated contract for lobbying services. $10,000 for document shredding in compliance with Missouri state law, and $4,000 for a new computer in the Emergency Preparedness Division. So I'll quickly highlight some of our other funds, but I will remind the council and the community that this year we are resuming the departmental budget presentations on May 28th and May 29th. So you'll hear more detail from each of the departments about both their operations and their specific funds at a later time. So the city administers 5 additional voter-approved sales tax funds, and like all cities' funds, these continue to experience pressures of increasing costs to support their intended use against limited revenue growth. The only exception to this is the fire public safety sales tax, which received an increased allocation in November of '21, thanks to the approval of the voters of independence. Estimated expenditures in sales tax funds are down due primarily to scaling back on the amount available for capital improvements. As you can see, where it's authorized, a greater portion of these funds are being used on salaries, other benefits, and operating expenses, which is then leaving fewer and fewer dollars behind for the capital improvements and equipment purchases themselves. As with the general fund, the utility funds are up in expenses overall due to an increase in capital spending and personnel expenditures. Part of this is due to the merging of the water department into municipal services and the reallocation of existing personnel, so you are seeing some cost increases associated with that. Capital expenditures will not be all of these won't be spent in the next year, I wanted to say, but they are included in the 5-year CIP plan for major upcoming software and hardware purchases, including new data center. The Technology Service Department is planning early to spread these costs out to departments and lessen the budgetary impact to the department and their funds when these purchases occur. And as I mentioned with the general fund, some of those reduction in force changes, those also had corresponding impacts on our internal service funds. We are recommending the addition of 1 new position in the Technology Services Department to provide additional customer support. So that was the only increased expenditure there. All these others were the savings due to either the reduction in force or the elimination of those software programs I mentioned. We are projecting growth in the use tax at about 4%. Both police and the animal shelter will see more than a 9% increase next year, but some of those other funds are budgeted to receive less than their estimated amount, though compared to their actual spending amount, you can see increases there for all of the city's sales tax funds and general fund. The submitted budget does not forecast significant revenue growth in the enterprise funds, which is a result of limited economic expansion and flat consumption along with our fixed utility rates. But there are a couple of important highlights I want to make the council aware of. In Municipal Services Department, we have $33 million in capital improvement projects. We have addition of 2 additional pipe maintenance workers, which will help us continue to accelerate our main replacement program. In the Power and Light Fund, this is the first full year that reflects the elimination of the 6% rate reduction as recommended by the Public Utility Advisory Board and approved by the council last year. We also have the expansion of transmission and distribution capabilities to support growth on the east side of town, so additional infrastructure investments there. And then limited personnel additions in the Power and Light Fund, 1 engineering supervisor and 1 system operator trainee. Health insurance, with the exception of the OAP1 change that I mentioned, there are no changes to the structure of the split between the employer and the employee. This remains a very important recruitment and retention tool for the city. Inflation, though, does remain a factor that we have to navigate around, increasing costs of everything, including the health insurance market. Inflation, we know, continues to impact our employees' household budgets, so we are looking to not only stabilize our health insurance fund, but with our bids that we've received so far this year, we anticipate that we may be able to see a decrease in health insurance rates for our employees. So We will see if that comes to fruition, but certainly encouraging at this point. So as I wrap up, and this budget is now submitted to you for your consideration, our city is in the midst of some of the most decisive years it has faced in its long history. After 50 years of planned growth, the Little Blue Valley is finally realizing the development that has long been discussed. New and varied housing stock, as you're going to hear here in a moment, is being added to our community, while underutilized spaces are being primed for development and redevelopment. Pending decisions are being made on transformational issues like the city charter, the general obligation bond, and the future of Independence Power and Light. These have the capacity to further enhance the delivery of basic services and enhance the quality of life for our community members. But the City of Independence does have a series of underlying issues that continue to threaten our financial stability, and these promising developments will not deliver on their full potential without solidifying our financial position. The city has had many hard conversations and taken equally hard steps together each of the last 8 years to bolster our fiscal health, but there is more work to be done. Deliberate and thoughtful dialogue must continue to be had about what programs and services our community values most. A budget is, after all, a statement of values. So I want to thank you, the council, and the city departments for the assistance provided in preparing this budget. I also wish to thank all the city staff who serve our community. They do so with the utmost professionalism and commitment to service in a highly challenging environment. The options that are presented to you are not easy choices, and my staff and I are ready to address any questions regarding the information presented. As I mentioned, we'll have budget hearings on May 28th and 29th. There will be a public budget hearing next Monday night here at the City Council meeting, 6 p.m. at City Hall. The ordinance adopting the budget will have its first reading on June 3rd and second reading and final consideration at the June 17th meeting. Mr. Mayor and members of the council, happy to answer any questions I can this evening.
Thank you. Well done. I appreciate your work on this. I know that the finance department has worked many hours. The department heads have worked many hours, so I thank you for all the work that you've done to get us to this point. And I know, Mr. City Manager, you've worked endless hours to do this, and we've talked about it, and I appreciate you being so kind to allow us to have those 2 nights to bring the directors in and have that discussion. So that's very, very helpful. Open it up to council to ask any questions. Please proceed.
I know tonight's the overview. I thank you for the time that your staff has given us to go over the budget so people don't have to listen to every nitty-gritty question we have. But from a big picture overview, I'm happy that the slope has changed on the future challenges we have, which is a testament to the hard work. But we still have a couple of rough years ahead with the consequential decisions that we will have to make to get us to a balanced budget. There is a tiny glimmer of light, which is that the city has been investing hard in its development, and that will take time to begin to have flow through to city general fund. And I know this requires a lot of crystal ball work. When do you think we will begin to see some of the benefits of the North Point investment as we bring new employers in there to help with the general fund?
I'm optimistic, cautiously, that within the next 5 years, you'll see very generous benefits of that hard work. We are conversing with North Point weekly. They are very aggressive in their pursuit of companies to fill the spaces that have been built and continue to be built and will be built in the valley. And not just focused on filling those spaces, but filling those with high-quality performing businesses that will provide jobs, that will provide additional discretionary income to our residents and our community to spend in our city, that will invest in our utilities through the supply of electric, water, and sewer service, and then have a reciprocal effect on the general fund through the payment in lieu of taxes. Those conversations obviously take time and they're give and take, but they are they're very exciting conversations that are being had with major international employers, not just, filling a building for the sake of saying there's occupancy in the building.
And my next question is, we've had multiple dedicated taxes. The one that's sort of less familiar to people is the marijuana sales tax. I know that that is generating income, which we have dedicated to planning for the Justice Center. Is that performing like you expected? Where do you think revenues will be from that?
Right now, the marijuana sales tax is exceeding expectations. If it was getting a performance review, that's what I would give it, exceeding expectations. We estimated for this year's budget $150,000 of revenue based on its performance this year. We are estimating revenues for this next fiscal year at around $900,000. So nearly 9 times, a factor of 9, performance over what we thought it would bring in. Right now, those dollars are being committed to help design the Justice Center, to pay the architectural fees, to help bring that vision into reality. That gives us something to have a conversation with the community about regarding the general obligation bond. But in a year's time, that portion of that project will be completed, and the council will then be able to have conversations about what other public safety uses those might be applied to.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Anyone else? Other questions?
Mr. Walker, just a question. So you spoke to this, but I don't want it to go I mean, you had a lot of words there, and I just want to ask you to say just a little bit more about priority-based budgeting and how that impacts what we do in the budget, and how, I don't want that to get lost because this is a major shift from what we've done in the past. And I just would ask you to say just a couple more things about that.
So with priority-based budgeting, rather than taking the dollar amount from last year's budget for a certain program in the city and carrying it forward, we looked at all services in the city, and it was just shy of 500 different services that are delivered in the city. I think it was 492 to be exact. Each of those was assigned a budget of what the true cost of running it is based on its actual expenditures. And then department directors did a peer review, not of their own services, but of other services in the city, against the city's action plans to look at its impact on the city council's adopted action plan, and other factors like are there other providers of this service in the community, like a private sector provider that we're competing against? Are we duplicating this service against another governmental entity that may be providing that? Or is there a nonprofit agency that does the same thing we're doing? And through that, we were able to rank all 492 of those. Given the sheer magnitude of that effort and the philosophical shift, I would say we took a major step towards that this year. I would not tell you we're finalized in our journey on that. I think this is still a learning experience for all of us, but I really do think it began to challenge us in our thinking about how we view our programs. And as I said, not looking at, well, what could be cut, but where are there opportunities to partner with somebody? Where are there opportunities to share resources so that we can take those dollars and spread those around to some of the programs that there are no other providers for and or are a higher priority against the council's action plan.
Great, thank you. I appreciate that additional, information. I'm going to hold any other questions or comments until we start talking with the department directors, but I appreciate that.
They'll be happy to answer them.
Anyone else? Other questions?
Mr. Mayor,
Oh, please proceed.
thanks. The graphic that you showed about how much we spend, if the budget's $1, how much we spend, is that pretty typical for the cities around us? Are we an outlier? Is that about right?
I would say it's about right. I'd say there's some important differences. We have a lower tax levy rate than other cities. We have a lower total assessed valuation than other cities, so our tax levy amount is being applied against a lower total multiplier. And some of the other cities do not have some of the same restrictions. Like, for example, the city of Lee Summit uses their police sales tax funds for operating expenses. Very little of that is spent on capital. Instead, capital is being used through their general obligation bond issues and not a sales tax issue. So they're able to use that to help pay salaries and benefits and personnel expenses for their department. But in terms as a percent of the general fund, I would say it's pretty equal.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mr. City Manager, and thank you to the staff, Melissa, for putting all that together and all the hard work, crunching the numbers and making sure everything balances. As I say every year, or at least over the past several years, it's one thing that to make sure that we're spending our money the way we say we are, the money we're bringing in, we're spending properly and corrective. And to tie into the next series of conversations with our housing study, I was reviewing that and looking at why some of the growth in some of those areas were the way they are in their building permits and their building of multifamily and other occupancies. It's because those communities have reinvested in themselves. They are very much further down the road than we are within reinvesting ourselves on a massive scale. We've done very well over the past 5 to 6 years, cost sharing, partnering, reinvesting in independence to a smaller degree. Western Independence is coming back alive slowly, but it's getting there. The big investments with North Point, that's a massive investment that will pay off eventually. But it's how we reinvest, how do we stabilize, bring our neighborhoods back to life, our commercial districts, and bring that tax money to Independence and also keep it here with tourism dollars. So as we're moving forward, we need to keep that big eye on that prize of investment and reinvesting into ourselves to help with our tax growth. That is one of the biggest things that really funds our general fund is our tax growth. So thank you for your presentation. Looking forward for the future presentations on the Mondays and Tuesdays.
Thank you, Council Member.
Thank you. Anyone else? I just have one question, if I could, Mr. City Manager. I want to, again, say thank you for your work, and I know the Finance Department's all their work. I had a question from a constituent today regarding this question. I know we've gotten the marijuana sales tax money, and we're taking that and using it for the architectural design for the Justice Center. And they had a question of, should we wait on that? And my answer, and you can tell me if I'm wrong or if I'm incorrect, my answer to them was, well, we're looking at it from the perspective of being shovel ready if in fact the GO bond is approved, so that we can have that, we're using that money now to design the work, be ready, and then if the GO bond is in fact approved, we can be ready to go ASAP rather than waiting until the GO bond is approved and do that. Of course, we all pray that that is approved, but if it's not, we're gonna have the design. So that was my answer. I wanted to make sure I was correct on my assessment or my viewpoint on it. And you're not going to offend me if you have any tweaks or adjustments or even tell me, hey, that was way off base. This is the answer.
That was well said. It's hard to improve upon it. I would, anytime you've gone to maybe a school district bond presentation or seen another city, usually you benefit from being able to see what those renderings look like, what your tax dollars are going to go toward. So you can very clearly visualize and see what your end result is going to be. And that's exactly what we're working on here in this process right now, is coming up with the specific renderings of what this will look like, so that we can have those conversations with our community, and then pending their approval, we can go out the day after and start putting shovels in the ground and get our men and women out of the tough conditions they're in right now sooner than later.
Yep. Thank you very much, but I appreciate that. Anyone else, other questions? That would then, I think, in my opinion, or if you feel like that's concluded and you've addressed everything.
That's good. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Excellent. Well done. And now, Mr. City Manager, if I can ask you to kind of give us a tee off of the housing study update and how we will proceed on that.
Yeah, while our friends are making their way up here, I'll just remind the council that about 2 years ago, the city completed and adopted its first housing study. One of the recommendations of that study was to keep the study current. Sometimes you do these plans, and then after a few years, they become irrelevant because of changes in factors. We've obviously seen big shifts in the housing market in the last 2 years, so we've thought it was important to get a look at how that's impacted Independence, provide the council with that update. And then next week, there is a resolution on your agenda that would formally adopt this plan pending what you hear here tonight. So I'm going to turn it over to our friends from Community Development.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the council. My name is Tom Scannell. I'm the Community Development Director. And with me tonight is Andy Pfister. He's with Development Strategies, and he will give the overview of tonight's presentation.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. Thank you for having me this evening. I'm going to go pretty quickly through the slides, and I may skip through a few because I want to have time to have some conversation, and I know you have some other things to do this evening. So why are we here? Like you've heard a lot tonight, a lot has changed in the last 2 years. And a lot of the changes that have occurred, particularly in Independence, impact demand for multifamily developments. And our question, when Tom called, was we really want to know what has changed and how does it impact demand. So just a few things that have changed here is you've had substantial multifamily activity. You have 2 Class A market rate developments that are mostly done. They're leased up and stabilized, and they're performing well. You have a couple more that have been, at least in the early stages of permitting and approval, and you may have some more coming. You have the major industrial development that we've heard about, Eastgate, and then there's potential for future redevelopment across the city. What has shifted? A lot's changed in the last 2 years, and not just in Independence, not just in the U.S., but globally. One of the reasons we update studies is we have new data every day. We have more data tools than we ever have before. And when we completed the last study, we were just getting the updated census numbers. So now we have more current data. Trends in remote work have reshaped our housing preferences, in addition to a number of other things. Construction costs increased rapidly, which is being passed on to consumers by creating a lot of development challenges, although we're starting to hear those are easing in some sectors and some markets. Interest rates increased rapidly, which has changed the buyer and seller relationship, has changed how developers can deliver product, and we may see a slowdown in multifamily deliveries because of the higher interest rate environment. And then rentership is rising again. It started to decrease a little bit, but with remote work and some other preferences, as well as a shortage of for-sale supply, we're seeing it come back up, which is driving demand, particularly for the Class A multifamily. I'm going to skip past this. I want to highlight just a few key trends that we saw that have changed in the last 2 years. We know that Independence, your median household income is increasing, but it's still relatively low within the region, so that a moderately priced and affordable housing continues to be very important here. We actually adjusted the income numbers for inflation, and incomes actually decrease when we adjust for inflation, which is really telling a story related to housing, that housing costs are outpacing increases in income. Independence is growing, but it's at a slower rate than a region. I see this as opportunity for Independence to continue to aim toward capturing more of that regional growth, and a lot of this new development in the long term will help with that. The demographics are shifting a little bit in terms of who is living in Independence. We're seeing increases in the family years, seniors and elderly. We're seeing some pretty substantial decreases in early workforce and empty nesters. We think part of this is because of what housing is available. So diversifying the housing stock, continuing to work toward getting a wider range of options, both types of housing and price points, will help balance what's available here so people can stay when they want to instead of looking elsewhere. We talked about inflation-adjusted incomes actually decreasing, while inflation-adjusted housing values are increasing. So that's part of the imbalance we're seeing nationally between wages and housing costs. over time, we are seeing those rent increases. And I was trying to go quickly, but then started looking at the slide. The red line here is the market rent, inflation adjusted over time. Rents are increasing. Vacancy is a little bit higher than in 2020, and that's because new product has come online and there's still some in lease up, but it's still at a healthy rate. And last year we saw permitting decrease. We expect that to be higher this year because of some of the pipeline development, and we've accounted for that in some of our demand projections. Again, Independence is lagging a little bit behind some of its peers, but again, that's changing. That's a changing trend that's really positive for the city. One of the things relating to what Doug was speaking about, housing cost burden has increased a little bit. So preserving existing quality affordable housing and improving the availability of affordable housing, whether through rent or utility improvements and efficiency, will help the housing situation. We're also seeing kind of an increase in unsheltered population. This is in Jackson County. It's a trend nationally, and part of it is driven by a lack of affordable housing options for people. So where does housing demand sit? We had some vacancy numbers just a few slides ago, and we surveyed a more select group of properties in Independence 2 years ago. We looked at those again. It's 15 properties, 17 when you add the newer properties. From 2021, when we did the original survey, to today, rents increased 21%. And vacancy decreased 2.8 percentage points. So from about 8 to about a little over 6%, I believe, are the numbers. So what that means in the quality, the more marketable housing, rental housing that you have, rents increased substantially, and the availability of units decreased, which is part of the pressure we're seeing in Independence and nationally. We have some examples of individual properties and what the trends were there, just to highlight those. I'm not going to go through those because of time, but we looked at the market rate, we looked at the affordable housing properties and senior housing properties there. So where did we land? Basically, Independence continues to have demand for all types of housing at all price points. When we did the study, starting 3 years ago and completing it 2 years ago, you had not, other than the two properties that were under construction at the time, Azure, and I can't remember the name of the other one, you had not had a new market rate Class A property built for 20 years. So the supply was behind. The research we did for this study, those properties are performing well. They've leased up, and part of the result of that is you're seeing more interest in building properties like that in Independence. When we evaluated that, as well as some other regional trends, consumer preferences, the continued strength of your healthcare market, we think that demand for that product will continue and is actually higher than 2 years ago. We believe the market has been proven by the properties and the interest, and you're getting very high quality developers, national developers, who want to build their product here in Independence. We did take into account the pipeline. I believe there's 2 properties that are in the system. Those have about 400 units, and then there's some single family and other smaller properties in the pipeline. A lot of those fall in this moderate income range, but if you look at page 10 of the memo that's attached, there's a table down in the green. We did a net new. We tried to account for those, and there's going to be continued demand in that price range in the future. So we believe that Independence in your market area can support additional quality market rate multifamily. And we also looked at senior demand. For your information, this is part of diversifying the housing stock. We look at national surveys on preferences of those 65 and older. A lot want to stay in their traditional housing as long as possible, but there is potential downsizing market. That's a product you largely don't have. It could be just smaller single-family homes, low maintenance. It could be attached homes, the villa style. a lot of different products that allow people who want to downsize to stay in the community. And so just a few conclusions. Success of new multifamily properties confirms that there's a market, and you're seeing the response to that from developers, reputable developers. We believe you can continue to capture regional demand. You are at a crossroads in the region, and there's a lot of positive trends around housing here. Eastgate Commerce Center will really, it'll support demand for moderately priced housing of all types, not just rental housing, but also leverage people who already live here. And then we understand that's part of the reason North Point wanted to build here. The overall demand outlook has improved because the market was a little less clear then, and it's a little more clear now. And there's still a need to diversify housing types. There's opportunity across the city to shore up some of the older housing stock, to do infill of some unique and new products, and continue to do the newer, kind of more traditional product. And that's my hopefully quick presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Please proceed.
So I'm a member of the Mid-America Regional Council, and one of the conversations we've been having there is changes in population growth and the anticipation that the speed with which communities are growing now will taper and slow. Do you think that any of those are going to have impacts on the short term and medium term for housing? Just curious.
That's a great question, and we did look at Mark's projections. I think it's going to be a longer term impact. We're at such a supply and demand imbalance today that in the shorter term we need more new units. And that's kind of my initial reaction.
Thank you. Anyone else have other further questions? Please proceed.
Thank you. So, Andy, is there like a sweet spot, a mix of multifamily, single family that a community wants to try to hit? And I don't know if that was in your scope of work. Are we there in that aspect of a good multifamily to single family ratio?
The short answer that doesn't answer your question is it depends. I think we look to what, and I can't remember the exact ratio off the top of my head, we look at what Independence is today and kind of look at regional trends and usually in conversations with people try to find kind of what the balance is. Nationally, it's about 35 to 40% rental and 60-ish percent for sale or homeowner.
Sure. From my understanding, I think we're probably pretty close to that from the last study that I looked at. You did hit an intriguing thing, unique infill development. Can you expand on that just a tad?
Oh, kind of what we see nationally is, you want product that complements the neighborhood, but you can have some more modern building techniques. You could have, sometimes it's 2 units or 3 units, or, kind of maybe a modern duplex with, and I know that word is subjective, but with an ADU in the back. So it's, you don't want it to be a eyesore or what have you in a neighborhood, but there's a lot of different kind of designs and continuing to be a lot of innovation on what can be built on, even a relatively small lot.
Sure. So I represent the northwest side of Independence, which has a lot of older stock. And depending on where you're located at, Inglewood, McCoy neighborhoods, here off the square, you're looking at homes that are close to 100, if not over 100 years old. Large, when people had larger families. So to use those as examples for how do we help stabilize, how do we keep people aging in place, help them keep density going to help growth is something that's very much a challenge and working with. So there's groups that are looking at to see how we can use available space in an appropriate way in conjunction with our city ordinances and overlays. So trying to do that is something that we're trying to think out of the box, get creative to do that, to help our housing stock and also to help with aging in place as well, because there's a lot of folks who just want to do that, and we need to give them as many tools as we can to help do that. But thank you for the study. It was very informative and kind of gives us a good understanding of where we're at. And I do have one question for the city manager. As we're looking forward with these multifamily developments, not knowing what will come down the line in the next 4 years, are we reaching out to our PD and our FD? Obviously, as the more we get, the more calls for service and the higher call ratios coming from these facilities to get their input for any future project that comes for us for consideration, just to get their input on that.
I think that's an important consideration, Councilmember, and I can't tell you for certain how those conversations have looked in the past, but I can certainly ensure that we're engaging those stakeholders moving forward. And the thought comes to mind to make sure not only do we get their input about some of the safety issues, but that we've got the right equipment on hand to respond to those kind of developments as well.
Yeah, good idea. Thank you. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you. Anyone else? Other further questions of Andy before we wrap up? Andy, thank you very much. Excellent job. Well done, and appreciate it. So,
Thank you.
And Mr. City Manager, anything else before we wrap this particular meeting up?
Nothing else tonight from the study session.
Thank you. That'll conclude our study session. And then we've got 3 minutes before we start the regular, because we can't start that early if I'm correct, because it's posted. So we've got 3 minutes and we'll be right back.